Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk, the podcast where we break down storytelling across books, television, and film with a special love for book-to-screen adaptation. Here, we talk about craft, character arcs, structure, dialogue, visual language, and the creative choices that shape how a story lands. If you like thoughtful conversational deep dives into the stories you can't stop thinking about, you're in the right place. Let's talk. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. This week, I wanted to sit down and record something that might be slightly self-indulgent, and this is going to be all about Season 2 of Heated Rivalry, spoilers for the long game, and scenes that do not happen in the book. They take place off-screen, so to speak, that I hope Jacob Tierney adapts for the show. So these are moments that are referred to in the long game, but we don't actually take part in as readers. And Jacob has the unique opportunity to insert them into Season 2 and write them himself for the show. This is something he did so well in Season 1 that it really got me thinking about how he could take some of these moments that Rachel Reed refers to in the source material and build them out so well like he did with so many of these characters in Season 1 and moments in Season 1 that really bring a new look and feel and layer to the story. And he's so brilliant at writing these scenes and has such a great understanding of the characters that all of these moments, as I was reading, I felt the need to catalog them and then break them down further and brainstorm how he might implement them into the show. Full disclosure, the long game is so full of narrative moments and story beats that I have a hard time picturing exactly how he's going to write them without having to eliminate a lot of moments. So I'm fully aware that most of these probably are not going to see the light of day, but I think it's fun to think about what he might do with them. And similar to how Rachel Reed wrote some scenes on her blog that filled in gaps in the stories, these are those types of moments that whether Jacob goes back and writes them for the show, or maybe one day Rachel decides to go back and write them on her blog, it's fun to brainstorm and it's fun to talk about and it's fun to imagine what might have happened in these moments. And I thought that that might be a fun topic to cover in this week's podcast episode. So again, full disclosure, we will be talking deep spoilers for the long game. We will be talking subplots in the long game. I will be referring to the source material in the long game. So if you have not read the book yet or you do not want any spoilers, this episode is not going to be for you. But if you do read the book ahead of Season 2 coming out, I hope you come back and listen to this episode and hopefully find some fun tidbits in it and have fun imagining how maybe some of these might show up on our screens once Season 2 airs. So there are multiple moments in the long game where we are in Shane or Ilya's head and they are referring to things that happen in the gaps of time between scenes and chapters. And that's mainly to move the story along. Obviously, we can't cover everything that happens within a set period of time, but it's also fun to give the world they exist in a little bit more of a broad backstory without having to dive into the nitty-gritty of that backstory every time. And Rachel does that very well in the long game because as much time as we spend with just Shane and Ilya, she does refer to a lot of moments outside of their relationship dynamic that help to let the reader know their lives are full outside of just these moments between them in the book. So the first one that I made note of was in chapter 4 of the long game. And this is when Shane and Ilya are still in the thick of their hockey camp. They're in the Ottawa hockey camp. They are going to have a week off and then they will do the Montreal camp. And in the space of time between the end of Heated Rivalry and the beginning of the long game, there's a whole season that we don't see. So that in and of itself is one of those moments that I'll be curious if Jacob includes any of that season because it's Ilya's last season playing for Boston. And I really, really want to see how those conversations went, how Ilya approached the Boston team and told them I'm leaving, if it was an angry conversation, if it was civil. We also don't really get any sort of insight into how difficult that year was, since they leave the cottage as a couple and have to go into their first full season as a couple, but separated, while Shane's in Montreal and Ilya is in Boston. So that's a very wide expanse of time that I don't expect Jacob to completely fill in, because there's no way he could cover it all. I do think he's going to address it though, whether that be through dialogue or maybe a montage, because he's great at montages. But once we push past that year and Ilya is in Ottawa, we don't get to see him join the team, move there, pick out his house, any of those details about him uprooting his life and getting to Ottawa. We just see him in Ottawa at the beginning of the long game. And the book starts out over the summer. So they're at the cottage, they're getting ready to go back for the next season. And that's another area that I'll be curious if Jacob includes in season 2, which is Ilya getting to Ottawa, setting up his life there, how he establishes his life there. And also that includes his time with Una and David, because he spends more time with them throughout this book as well. As we move forward in the story and we actually dive into the camps and we see Shane and Ilya over the summer with all of the counselors that they've accrued, all the hockey players they've invited at these camps, there's a reference to Shane having just won his 3rd Stanley Cup and the Conn Smythe Trophy. And that's a huge deal that he has won 3 Stanley Cups now for Montreal. And we, again, don't see him win that or his cup run in the book. We don't read about it. It's just referred to. And there's a reference to JJ using his cup day, which is when each player of the Stanley Cup winning team gets to have one day with the Stanley Cup, and they can bring it wherever they want, and they usually have their family and friends come and see it, take pictures. JJ uses his cup day and brings the Stanley Cup to their camp in Ottawa, and all of the kids there get to enjoy it. Shane has a conversation with one of the counselors named Max, and they talk about how great of a surprise it was that JJ had brought the Stanley Cup. And Shane was planning on using his own cup day the following week at the Ottawa camp, and he was thankful that the Montreal kids hadn't been left out, because JJ was able to use his cup day in Montreal, and Shane was going to be able to use his in his hometown of Ottawa. And so that's something that I think would be cute to show on screen, whether that's a quick clip or something including Shane with the cup, what that would look like, what that would mean for him to bring it home again to his hometown and celebrate. I think that would be a really fun scene that Jacob could include. And again, it doesn't need to be a scene with dialogue. It could just be part of a montage where we get to see him celebrating this 3rd cup win, because him winning 3 cups in Montreal becomes a very important part of the story later on in the long game, and how he was the one who pioneered that team and turned it around and won them those 3 cups. That's a big deal. And so I think seeing Shane with that cup is going to visually be very important to refer back to later on in the story when tensions start to rise with Montreal and that organization. The next moment that I really would love if Jacob covered, it is referred to in chapter 12 of the long game, and it's Ilya and Shane's interviews that they give for the documentary. We only hear them talking about it after they've given the interviews. They sort of skirt around it. The 2 of them want to watch the documentary together to hear what the other one said about each other. And Shane in particular presses Ilya about it quite a bit. And I think it would be fun if we actually got to see them sitting down separately to give the interview. Because again, in the book, when they get in an argument about it, Ilya makes it very clear that he was upset with what he had to say because he wanted to say so much more and he couldn't. And he snaps at Shane and says, "It was boring. I couldn't say any of the things I wanted to say. I said you were a great hockey player, a nice guy, very competitive, all of the shit that any of your teammates could have said. When you watch it, this is what you will see. Me saying nothing. I wanted to say you are fucking everything to me. Everything, okay?" And Shane is caught off guard by that and surprised by that. And I think that it would be really cool if we got to see just Ilya give that interview. Because then when he yells at Shane here, we've already seen him struggle to get through that interview. And then he can refer back to it in that fight with Shane. And we as the viewers will have that context and feel that pain ourselves because we've watched him give that interview and we have that connection to Ilya. We went through that interview with him as viewers. So I think that would be another really effective scene that Jacob could include and refer back to during this particular argument. In the same chapter, chapter 12, this is when Shane and Ilya go to the Pike's house, and Shane gets a phone call from Hayden that Jackie hurt her ankle, and they go over to the house together. And in the book, Ilya thinks to himself that he'd only been to the Pike's house once before for an olive branch in the form of a barbecue. And that is referring to the My Dinner with Hayden scene. And I think everybody in the fandom wants to see that scene play out on our screens. I'm optimistic that maybe they'll do some sort of a bonus episode where this could take place because Rachel Reed wrote a very in-depth scene covering this. It's a few scenes, but her passage in her blog about the My Dinner with Hayden moment is really beautifully written, and it feels like something that should be included in this book and also in the show. So again, they refer to it in chapter 12 off camera. This book was published before she wrote the My Dinner with Hayden scene, but now we have the My Dinner with Hayden scene written somewhere. So I hope that Jacob takes that and makes it a part of the scripts because I think that that would be really great. It's also in the timeline taking place in between the end of Heated Rivalry and the start of the long game. So again, it's a great scene to bridge the gap between the timelines. So I really hope we get that. Again, in chapter 12, if you haven't read the long game, chapter 12 is a golden one because this is when Hayden and Jackie go to the hospital and Shane and Ilya end up watching Hayden's kids. And they get married in their living room by the kids. And it's so cute. And I know for a fact that Jacob is going to include that scene. But the way it's written, there's really only a reference to the moment they get married. It talks about the passage of time a few times in the book. So it will say it had been 20 minutes of them getting the living room ready before the wedding actually takes place. And so I want to see those 20 minutes before the wedding. I want to see the kids picking out the outfits that Ilya and Shane wear. I want to see those kids setting up their toys and finding the plastic rings and deciding who is going to say what and ripping the paper that they throw at them afterwards. That's the kind of stuff that isn't written. It's referred to in the source material, and Jacob has the unique opportunity to fully flesh out and show us on screen. And the dialogue that the kids, share between Shane and Ilya is so cute and perfect. I really don't think he needs to tamper that. It's more so the in-between, because Ruby and Jade, which they have different names in the show, they say, we could have a wedding today. And they ask, can we? And Ilya's the one that says, what do you say, sweetheart? And then 20 minutes later, Shane was standing in the Pikes' living room wearing a magician's cape, a top hat, and holding a pink plastic heart-shaped ring. Ilya was standing next to him wearing a red sequined bow and a headband covered in flowers. He was holding an identical purple ring. Across from them stood two 7-year-old girls wearing princess dresses, and behind them was a large assembled audience of stuffed toys, and Arthur, who was wearing a firefighter costume and a freshly painted blue manicure. So again, I want to see that. I want to see how that moment came to pass. And then after the kids wed them, the book talks about how they watched a movie with the kids, but I want to see what else happens. Did they make them dinner? Did they play games? What did they ask them? What questions did the kids have? We know that they made lemonade because Ilya drinks the lemonade, and Shane makes a reference to that when they get home. And did the kids insist that they keep wearing their rings until they left the house? All of those little details are so important to me, and I hope that they are to Jacob. I have to imagine that they are, and I want to see them. I just think that that would be really, really impactful to get a fully fleshed out moment at Hayden's house where they're around children. We get to see them interacting with kids, because when they go home, the two of them both feel like they had been looking into their future. And I think that Hayden's kids are so great with them that Shane and Ilya can really imagine being parents when they're around them. And it's such an important moment for them. I think that the moment is too big to not have it last more than just the I do's and the wedding part. The next scene that I hope we get on screen takes place in chapter 13. And this chapter is when Ilya decides to host a Halloween party for his team. And I want to see him picking out his Halloween costume, or at least getting ready for this Halloween party, putting his outfit on, sending Shane a photo, because we know that Shane knows what he looks like. How does he get that photo? What's the context? I need to see those text messages. And I also want to see him decorating the house, because when Shane arrives there later that night, he points out that there's decorations everywhere. I just want a little montage of seeing Ilya go to a party city and pick out all of the decorations and putting them up in his own house, and then letting all of the guys on the centaurs into his home. And we know that the scene ends with him feeling quite depressed. So I think it would be important to see the peak of the night when he's in a great mood, and then contrast it at the end of the night when he's feeling very low. And also, I just think it would be fun to see him putting on a gladiator costume and sending a photo to Shane and getting Shane's reaction. So that's another one. Expanding upon that, Ilya at one point during the party gets overwhelmed and is feeling very low and sad. And he goes into his room during the Halloween party. And it's another opportunity to showcase Ilya's depression in this scene, because he would be alone. There wouldn't be any other characters around him for him to have to bounce off of or put a mask on for. And so it would be a great opportunity early on in the story and in the season to convey his pain over missing Shane and how badly he wishes his teammates could leave so that he could be alone to wallow in those emotions, and where so much of Ilya is so internal in the long game. As many opportunities as Jacob can take, I hope he does, because there's going to be a lot of acting without dialogue where Connor's story is going to have to convey that. And this moment is a great place to insert a scene that showcases the level of Ilya's depression as he continues to get worse over the course of the story. The other moment in chapter 13 that I want to see is Shane getting ready to drive through the night to Ottawa to be with him on Halloween night. And how did he prepare for that drive? Do we see it? Do we get any reference of it? And again, I don't know if Jacob's going to go into a full-fledged scene when he arrives there, but it's an important moment because Ilya feels very touched by the fact that Shane would drive 2 hours in the middle of the night to see him that way. It's very out of character for Shane. And so I think that it would be an important moment for them to highlight, but I think it would also be a good comedic moment to, similar to season 1 when he's waiting in his hotel room for Ilya to come up there for the first time, see Shane panicking, or maybe not panicking, he could be excited to get himself together and drive in the night and surprise Ilya on his doorstep. And we know that he gets a little adventurous in this scene as well with their sex life. So I think it would be funny, or at the very least important, to see Shane's point of view getting ready to drive to Ottawa. Chapter 13 is also the night that Ilya decides he needs therapy. So again, piggybacking off of how important it would be to show Ilya alone in his room, I think it's important that we see what happens when the two of them go upstairs and fall asleep. And the next morning, Ilya cries. And I think Ilya crying and leaning against his door and sobbing is so heartbreaking. And I know that Connor's going to hit it out of the park in that moment, but we need more moments leading up to that. And I also want a moment after. It would make sense if they showed him crying and slumped against his front door and cut the scene there, just so we kind of get the impact and then we move on. But I think the fact that this is the moment when he decides to get some professional help, we never actually see him make that phone call. He just appears in the room with Galina. I think if they do it the same way in the show, it would be effective because we can fill in the gap and infer that he decided right after that to call someone. But I kind of want to linger with him a little bit. What does he do after he cries? How is he picking himself up and coping? What is he doing to cope? Because we are very privy to Shane's coping strategies and the things he tries to do to self-regulate, but we don't really get to see Ilya do that quite often. And so I think that that could be an opportunity for Jacob or Connor to create some sort of a moment. Maybe it's a physicality, maybe it's just a small thing that gives Ilya a very identifiable trait or characteristic that we can track over the course of the season. Similar to how he scrunches his nose or sniffles or grabs his ear in season 1, I think they're going to have to create something similar to convey his depression for season 2. Moving on from that, in chapter 14, when Ilya is in therapy with Galina for the first time, I really hope that they include as many scenes in therapy as they can possibly fit, because there's so much that is said in those scenes that gives the show the opportunity to pull some of the internal monologue moments from the book and have him talking to another character in order to convey them. And it's the perfect opportunity for that. And in chapter 14, Galina asks him about his mother. And we, while reading, never actually hear what Ilya says to Galina. And so I hope that in season 2, similar to the Russian monologue, Jacob takes that opportunity to give Connor another monologue where he talks about his mother, and we actually get to hear Ilya's thoughts about his mother, and Jacob would have the opportunity to flesh out her character more and give her some personality traits and really a backstory that she doesn't fully get in the book that could be really, really beautiful and impactful. And I think that a lot of people are curious about his mother, and he was so young when he knew her, and so what he would remember of her would be very important to Ilya. It would mean so much, the little fragments of her that he's able to hold on to. And so I think having some sort of a conversation that we are able to listen in on about her and really hammer home how important she was to Ilya and the small things that she might have done or said that shape and inform who he is as an adult would be really impactful and beautiful. Piggybacking off of that, we jump forward a few chapters. In chapter 23, Ilya's back in therapy with Galina, and he's talking to her about Shane, and she asks Ilya to tell Shane in therapy what he's feeling, and Galina pretends to be Shane in that scenario. And we don't get that dialogue in the book. So again, I think that that would be another really smart opportunity for Jacob to take a scene that were omitted in the source material and do his magic and write it out and give us a really clear idea of how Ilya's feeling about Shane, because the book paces it so that there's, the climactic moment when the two of them are finally able to talk to each other about how they feel. But it works in the book because we're in Ilya's head, so we know how Ilya feels. The show needs to be able to explain to the viewer how Ilya is feeling, and so his conversations with Galina are the perfect place for that. And so this particular conversation with Galina about what he wants to say to Shane is really important. When we have the plane scene, in the book we get Ilya's point of view of that scene. There's also more context if you read Role Model, which is Troy's story. And so I think Jacob can pull from both of those books to map out what he wants to cover in the plane scene. But in the aftermath of it, Shane proposes to Ilya. And I want to see Shane telling his parents that he's proposing to Ilya, because he refers to that in the book. I want to get their reaction. I want to see their emotions. I want their commentary and input on how it should be done and what the ring should look like. And I want to know how much Shane even shares with them, because I think that that's a really great place to insert more David and Yuna. I think that it's a great opportunity to see Shane short-circuiting and how nervous he is, how he overthinks it. I think it would just be a great scene to insert there. Just a quick one. It doesn't even have to be a long one, of him telling his parents, I'm proposing to Ilya, because you have to imagine that after that plane scare, he would be on the phone with them trying so hard to self-regulate, and he's such a mess, and they're not in a very good place when that happens, and he has already reached out to his mom about their fight. And so I just think that there's a really great opportunity to expand upon how heavily Shane leans on his parents after he and Ilya fight, and then after the plane scare, because it would have put so much into perspective for Shane, and I think his parents would have been a great big part of that. I also think it would be funny if we got a scene where we're watching Shane try and navigate a mall or a jeweler, trying to pick out a ring incognito, because as far as the general public in Montreal knows, why would he be picking out rings? You know, I just think that that's another scene that I want to see. I want to see if he's buying something online or if he's going to a jeweler. What's he telling the jeweler? Is he driving as far outside of town as he possibly can to find this ring? Or is he past the point of caring at this point and he throws caution to the wind and walks into the first jewelry store he can find? I think that's another great scene that could be included in the show that gives us more of an insight into how Shane's feeling, because in the book, Ilya is the point of view we're in during this proposal, so we don't get to see or feel what Shane is experiencing or how nervous he is before Ilya walks into his house. So I think the show has the unique opportunity to include that. There's also a reference in chapter 26 to Ilya meeting with Galina again after the plane crash. And I think that this is another really important conversation for Ilya to have had with his therapist, because that's a really life-altering moment. And he has so many deep thoughts and heavy thoughts in the aftermath of the plane scare. And so I would like to have this conversation play out on screen. I would like to have some sort of an idea of how Ilya tries to wrap his head around this huge pivotal moment in his life where he truly feared that it might be over, and he prays on the plane and he thinks of his mother on the plane. And I just think that it would be a really impactful thing for him to talk about it with somebody after going through it in that way. So I hope we get a conversation between Ilya and Galina after the plane crash. There's also in chapter 27 a reference of Scott telling Shane that he wants to coach at their camps. And this is a off-screen conversation. So again, this would be another one where, do we get to see that? Do we actually get to see Scott approach Shane, who historically I don't think that they talk quite often in the Heated Rivalry book. Like they included him in the show during the All-Star games. That doesn't happen in the books. He really doesn't talk to Scott quite often in the books. So again, where they've made so many changes to Scott's character in the show, is this then a conversation that we're going to get on screen? That's a question I have. There's also in chapter 28 the All-Star Weekend press conference where Shane and Ilya are presented as non-rivals. And this takes place before they talk to Commissioner Crowell. And so do we get to see that? Because again, that could be another opportunity for them to draw a parallel or a visual callback with season 1. Do we get their feet touching under the table? What are they going to say to the press when they are at this press conference as non-rivals? I think that's another really great scene that could be inserted in here to give more context as to how the world around them is responding to them being friends and not rivals anymore. In chapter 29, Ilya tells Shane that he plans to talk to Svetlana about he and Shane. And again, we're in Shane's point of view, and Shane just kind of recalls that Ilya had mentioned it and that he had been supportive of it. But I want to see that conversation. I want to see how he tells Shane about his dinner plans and see Shane give him his blessing, because I think that they've made Svetlana so important that there's got to be more conversations between Shane and Ilya to better convey to Shane just how much Svetlana means to him and what this conversation would mean to him. And again, it's going to be a different conversation because Svetlana is much more in tune with Ilya and the fact that he's in love with a man in season 1 of Heated Rivalry, whereas in the long game, she has no idea. They've largely been out of contact. They're not as close. And so this conversation that Ilya's going to have with Svetlana will inherently look different. And I think that because of that, he needs to have a more in-depth conversation with Shane about her, because we see him bring her up a few times in season 1 and it's a sore point for Shane. And so how do we get from that scene in the finale where he's about to set the cottage on fire when he mentions Svetlana to him being supportive of him going out to dinner and telling Svetlana about him? Piggybacking off of that, in chapter 29, we actually get the conversation between Ilya and Svetlana, and they talk about his relationship with him after she finds out that it's Shane. And so again, they talk for 3 hours in the book. We're not going to get a 3-hour long conversation in the show, but I want to have more elaboration on their conversation because we get a few lines of dialogue, we get the gist of the conversation, and then we skip forward and it's implied that they've been sitting there for 3 hours. And so this is going to be a really pivotal moment for Ilya. I think this is going to be a turning point for their friendship. And just like we got the scene with Shane and Rose, I think that this sit down that Ilya has with Svetlana is going to be really healing for him. And so I'm very excited for Jacob to fill in the gaps and change the dialogue, because they're not going to be able to use the lines of dialogue from the book because Svetlana is a different character in the show. And so he really gets to take this conversation and turn it into something really unique and beautiful that is true to her representation in the show. And so I'm very excited for that scene because I think that he's such a master at the dialogue and the callbacks and all the ways in which he's made Svetlana so much more interesting. She's already so in tune to Ilya and knows more than I think he realizes. So I think there's an opportunity for a comedic moment there. I think there's an opportunity for them to talk about Ilya's past more, and she knows about Sasha, so you could get them talking about that, or just her being the only person at that point in the story in his life that is excited for him and feels happy for him. And that's going to be so beautiful. And I totally trust Jacob to do that scene justice. And yeah, I wish we could have the full 3 hours that they sit at dinner together, but I know what he decides to put down for dialogue is going to be something that hits me right in the solar plexus. So I'm excited for that. In chapter 30, this is when the long game and role model overlap specifically with Troy's storyline, because this is when Ottawa has their Pride Night and Troy comes out. And we know that the book covers that from Ilya's point of view. And when he's home afterwards, he's so upset. And in the book, we can infer from Shane's commentary, because he says, I watched it, that he had been at home and saw Ilya during the standing ovation and could tell that he was feeling very emotional about this. So I really want to make sure that we include a moment where, even if we're just in Shane's home in Montreal, having him watch this play out on screen, similar to the Scott and Kip kiss from season 1, I think it's important for Shane to register just how much this is affecting Ilya. So I hope we flip back and forth where we're on the ice with Ilya, we get to see the crowd's reaction to Troy, we get to have that really beautiful moment for Troy, but I also think it's important to loop Shane into that scene, just like how it was laid out in season 1 and episode 5. I think that having Shane be so far away from him and watching Ilya struggle is going to be really impactful, and then also make the scene that follows when he goes to Ilya in Ottawa and tries to comfort him afterwards, and they have that conversation about what it feels like for them to watch Troy come out on TV and still not be out themselves. And that whole interaction, I think, hits or lands better if we get to see Shane's own reaction to Troy coming out during the broadcast. In chapter 31, this is after they have their conversation with Crowell, which I know that Hudson Williams had said that that's one of the ones he's looking forward to the most. And I think that that's going to be a great scene, and whoever they cast as Crowell is gotta have thick skin, because I think that the fan base is gonna hate them no matter what, and that'll be a great scene. But in the aftermath of that, when they walk outside, Shane brings Ilya to a chicken parm place in Ottawa that he's always wanted to bring him to. And this is their first ever public meal together. So this feels like a very big deal to me that we should get to see on screen. What are they ordering? Where are they sitting? Is this when Shane finally breaks his macrobiotic crazy diet? Do people see them? What is going through their head? Like, do they hold hands on the sidewalk? I just need to know how that first public meal together went and what they talk about. And that's really important to me. And I hope that Jacob covers it or mentions it, something. I just think that that's like a huge moment for them to step outside and be a couple publicly for the first time and go to a restaurant and do something they've never done before. I just need to see that on my screen. In chapter 35, we might cruise right through this, but the Montreal and Ottawa playoff series goes to a game 7. And so that would be a very intense, very long, competitive series. I think it would be interesting to see how Shane and Ilya handle it respectively, because they make a conscious decision to stay away from each other during that time. And while it probably will play out kind of in a montage, I would have to imagine, just for time, I'm curious how Jacob's going to handle that and how they talk to each other in those moments, and what it feels like for them to be playing against each other when everyone in the crowd knows that they're together. I think that it would be important to explore that and what it feels like on the ice, but also what does that look like after the games? What do the interviews look like? What does that all pan out like? Because I think that giving that context is another great way for the show to reiterate the thing that they've been so afraid of for basically 10 years. We need to see that somehow. And so I think this series is a great opportunity to reinforce that, and also reaffirm that the fears that Shane and Ilya have had for the duration of this story and the show were very real, and we get to see them playing out on screen. So the whole playoff series, I think, is going to be really important. We're obviously going to get game 7, but I hope that they fill in and paint a picture for games 1 through 6 as well. In chapter 36, Ilya's team has won, and he has continued on in the playoffs. And we know from the book that Shane and his parents watch his playoff series. And it's the first time Ilya has family in the crowd. I think that it would be really great if we got to see that. How might it look if the whole Hollander family are sitting in a press box and everyone in the ring can see them there? What is that like? And also, I want to be on the ice with Ilya when he looks up and sees them all sitting there and feels the overwhelming sense of joy and pride and happiness that comes with that. We should see that on screen in some form or fashion. And I think that Shane being brave enough to do that is a big deal. That should also be represented, because his parents are with Ilya so much, but his parents aren't public figures like Shane. And I think that Shane watching his playoff series on TV is one thing for him to be supportive. It's another for him to go. So having Ilya have family in the crowd for the first time, it deserves time on screen. And then my last moment that I really hope we get some sort of on-screen moment for is in chapter 39. And that's when Shane has finally signed with Ottawa, and he goes alone and signs the paperwork and comes back, and he has all his swag on, and Ilya can't even believe that they're going to play on the same team together and that this is really happening. And Ottawa sends Shane and Ilya out to dinner. And this again is their second dinner, presumably, that they are going out to eat in public as a couple. And I want to see it. I want to see them get dressed up. I want to see how sickeningly happy they are. I want to hear about what they talk about, and Ilya making jokes about all the players that Shane's now going to be introduced to and teammates with. And I want to hear Ilya joke about how he's the captain and Shane's got to fall in line. I just think there's so many great opportunities for dialogue, and using this dinner as a way to kind of wrap up any loose ends between them heading into their first season as teammates and husbands with one another. They're a married couple. I want to see that. I think everyone wants to see that. So that's another self-indulgent one of mine is the Ottawa dinner after Shane signs with Ottawa. And obviously then we're waiting for Rachel to finish Unrivaled, and I'm curious how that's going to go because it seems like it picks up right where the long game ends, which would be the start of their first season together on Ottawa and opening night in October. And so there's really not much that comes after the story ends, the long game ends, that I think I want to see the blanks filled in for, because it sounds like she's just going to pick right up where we leave off in the long game. But these are the big ones for me. These are the heavy hitters. There's a lot of them. I think there's 23 or 4 of them. And yeah, again, maybe self-indulgent of me, but when you know that you have the writing quality that Jacob Tierney put out for season 1, and you know that he can fill in the gaps so well because he understands these characters so beautifully, why wouldn't I be selfish and tell him to include some of these scenes? I also think narratively, they would add a lot. There's a lot in this book that is in between the ears of these two characters, and as a book reader, you can be let in on those moments by reading them, and in the show they have to show them. So maybe some of the things that they hope to convey that Shane and Ilya are feeling, the vehicle of these scenes could be used to convey that to us, or a conversation taking place by way of one of these scenes could be used to convey that to us. So again, it's all so exciting to think about how creatively they can tackle this source material and adapt it. And we know they're great at montages. Some of these could be montages. Some of them I really think could use proper dialogue for, and I hope we get them. But at the end of the day, I will be happy with whatever we get. I plan on doing a breakdown video talking about maybe what will be included episode by episode for season 2, what I hope they include, what I think might get cut. I'll definitely do an episode diving into that, especially since we have a while before we're going to get season 2. But it's going to come faster than you think. I think it's a pretty impressive turnaround time that we're going to have them already filming season 2 the summer of 2026, when the show just came out at the end of 2025. So I'm very excited. I would love to hear your feedback if there's any scenes that happen off screen, so to speak, or off camera from the long game that you think would be inserted into the show really well. And of the ones I mentioned, if you have any input into how those conversations might go, I'd love to hear your feedback as well, because I think that's a really fun discussion to have. As always, if you've made it to the end of this podcast episode, thank you so much for listening. I sincerely appreciate it. I love geeking out over this stuff, and it's been so fun to talk with so many of you in the comments. Thanks for chatting.